Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Nick. I will be your host for today. The topic of today's webinar is the future of podcasting, which is a very ambitious title, but hopefully you guys will be able to judge at the end of this hour whether it lives up to expectations. And hopefully we'll share with you something new and exciting that's happening in the world of podcasting. Introduce you to new features that you can start delivering to your listeners and start to really grow better engagement, better discovery and improve monetization with your listeners. I'm just going to, first, before we start, just do a few introductions. I'll hand over to you first, Todd.
I guess I can hear myself. Sorry. I had the volume turned down. Hey, I'm Todd Cochrane. Of course, I'm the founder of Blubrry Podcasting.
And I'm Nick. I'm the co-founder of Fountain. Fountain is a podcast app on iOS and Android. And all of the features you're going to learn about today, you can find in Fountain.
And I'm Chris. You can find a bunch of my shows over at jupiterbroadcasting.com.
Great. So just to cover the contents of today's session, like I said, we're going to introduce you to some new features in your Blubrry and PowerPress dashboard. We're going to look at their impact on listener engagement, growth, monetization. And I'm going to take you through step by step how to implement these features either in the Blubrry dashboard or in the PowerPress Blubrry plugin. And we have Chris here as well to share some insights and best practice on how to use these features to their greatest potential. He's obviously a podcaster that's been using these features for a couple of years. He has some great insights and experience on how to use them to their most. And we'll also do a Q&A with Chris at the end. So if you guys have any questions on anything we cover in today's session, please just put them in the chat. We will maybe just cover them as they come up, or maybe save them to the end. We'll just kind of see how it goes. But please don't be shy, and all of your questions will be answered. So let's get into it. Just to begin with, the reality is the average person only listens to podcasts for 1 hour a day. And so that means you're competing with 4 million podcasts for the attention of listeners during this hour. And obviously behind some of these podcasts, you have global media networks, creative production, marketing teams, well-known celebrities, and they're reaching millions of people, earning millions of dollars in revenue. So the question is, how are you going to stand out from the crowd, attract new listeners, keep your audience engaged, and generate an income? And how are you going to do all of this while staying up with your publishing cadence and staying motivated and inspired? And we believe that the best place to begin is actually by focusing on your listener experience. So I'm sure everyone here remembers this. This definitely brings back some really good memories for me of when podcasting was so simple and beautiful, which it still is in some senses, but this is nostalgic. And think back to the first time you ever listened to a podcast and compare that with your experience of listening to podcasts now. And you'll probably notice that most podcast apps today have the same basic set of features that they did when podcasts first launched on the iPod 20 years ago. And so if podcasting is, say, pretty much the same, then why is it that YouTube has features like comments, playlists, chapters, transcripts, and of course the live stream, which we're on now? And the reason is because YouTube doesn't use RSS distribution. When you publish a podcast through YouTube, people can only listen on YouTube, so they have full control over the listener experience. When you publish a podcast through Blubrry, people can listen to it on hundreds of different podcast apps, which means much less control. And I think this is why the listener experience of podcasts has been held back, and it's been RSS that's held it back. And the reason is because there's no common language for hosting providers like Blubrry and apps like Fountain to support these new features until now. So this brings us on to Podcasting 2.0, which, in plain words, is a set of new standardized features that make podcasting better for everyone. It's a project led by Adam Curry, who is actually the person who helped put podcasts in the iPod back in 2005. And Podcasting 2.0 gives us that common language we need for features like chapters, transcripts, live streams to work in a consistent way across the ecosystem. And these are some of the features we're going to explore in today's session. And like I said, you can enable all of these features in your Blubrry or PowerPress dashboard. We're going to show you how. And once you have these features enabled, you can ask your listeners to get a modern podcast app like Fountain or many others that allow all of your listeners, wherever they are, to get the same great experience. So I'm going to head into the first feature, which is chapters. And And so this is how chapters look in Fountain. You have the chapters appearing on the actual player, and you'll have custom chapter artwork that pops up, and you can cycle through the chapters from the player. And you can also see the chapters on the episode page itself. So this is how they look. They look somewhat different in the different modern podcast apps, but generally speaking, you can access the chapters from the player and from the episode page. So why are chapters useful? Firstly, it's a massive added convenience for listeners. It's a really great way to clearly signpost what you're talking about in your episodes, when and how long for. And particularly if you have longer episodes that cover a broad range of topics, like if a listener is only really interested in one particular topic, they can just skip to it and they don't have to scan through the whole episode to find it. So chapters fix that problem. The second thing is they provide some great opportunities for deeper storytelling. Because each chapter can have its own artwork, you can use these visuals to support your audio. So for example, if Fountain had a podcast, which unfortunately it doesn't, but if we were talking about one of our new updates, we might actually show screenshots of the new updates in chapters and break down each feature by chapter. And again, if you had a topic that was best understood, if you had charts or graphs, you can add those to kind of add extra context. And a lot of people actually use them to show GIFs and stuff. So you can have a lot of fun with this feature. And then the other thing too is you can drive clicks to any web page. So if I just go back a slide, you can see that I can have links for each of my individual chapters. And again, this is really useful. Like if you have a topic where it's helpful to provide more materials or resources, links to a website, to a Wikipedia, or even if you're like on the hook with your sponsors to drive downloads or visits to their webpage, you can do that with chapters. Just include the link in the chapter, and it's a really easy way for listeners just to get straight to the page you want to send them to. And then lastly, it's a great way to stand out from the competition. Like despite all the benefits that chapters bring, only like 1% of podcasts support them, which is a real shame because I think they're really powerful. So it's a great way to differentiate yourselves from other podcasts.
And we hear from our listeners.
So how to add chapters in Blubrry. There's two ways to do this.
Oh, I think we just lost Nick. I'm sorry, Nick. Where'd you go? I was going to mention while he's frozen that we hear from our listeners all the time that they love the chapters.
Chapter files.
There he is. Welcome back, Nick. We got
Hey,
you.
Nick, you are froze for about 60 seconds.
Oh, am I back now?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, cool. I think maybe you just missed the part when I was talking about how to add chapters in Blubrry. I'll just pick up from where I left off.
Very good.
Go ahead. Oh, he froze again. Let me help Nick out here. But, creating chapters is really simple in Blubrry. There's a built-in chapter editor. And you can upload your own chapters if you have a chapter creator yourself, or you can use apps that support this. So you froze again, Nick. So I kind of read through your slide here, but if you actually want to show the chapter creator in Blubrry, maybe you can go to that next slide. Or is he froze again?
Yeah, he was unfroze for a sec. You just have to get him on his good moments. They come and go. There you go.
Nick, I think you can go to the next page. We've talked about this slide, but you were definitely froze. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. So yeah, this just shows you the view inside the Blubrry dashboard for how to add chapters using their chapter editor. So you'll just go to your dashboard, go to edit episodes, and then choose chapters. And then all you do is just type in the start time of the chapter, the title, the URL. You can add your image there. It's super, super simple. And a very similar experience as well using the Blubrry PowerPress plugin. So again, you have the option to add a chapter file or use the chapter builder. It's exactly the same UI. Very easy to do. Only takes a few seconds, or maybe a few minutes. A few seconds is maybe a bit too eager. And then you have chapters available for your episode.
Hey, Nick, one thing I will add, and Chris, I'll let you go next,
Sure.
is our AI system will actually auto-create chapters for you. Then you can get basically a head start and be able to edit them for the customers that are using our Blubrry Pie. But and also your team function, you can actually have team members come in and do this later if you don't have time during the initial production of the episode. But go ahead, Nick.
That's brilliant. I love that. I will add too, one of our tricks is there are multiple tools where you
Cool.
can export your markers in your audio editor, and it will convert that to a chapter file for you. And that's one of our tricks is while we edit, we just drop a marker, we name the marker the name of the chapter, and then when we're all done, we export that list and it converts to chapters and we upload it.
I think we're ready for your next slide, Nick. Or maybe he's froze on his side now. We had great internet 20 minutes before we started this today.
I shouldn't have said anything. I commented on it even. I shouldn't have even commented on it. I should know that by now. I could also add, while we're talking about this, is we've also taken this, like during the holidays, we'll have a holiday special episode, and we'll change out the chapter art per chapter with some holiday-themed version of our logo. It's just kind of something fun you can do like once a year to put a little extra craftsmanship into your podcast through chapters.
All right, Nick, I think we have you back. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Just let me know if I drop out again, guys, and apologies for that.
Will do.
Cool. Okay, let's move on to the next feature, which is transcripts. I think transcripts are a seriously underrated feature. Those of you who are paying attention will have noticed that Apple started supporting transcripts earlier this year, which is great to show that some of the bigger players are now adopting some of these features. Just firstly, like this is how chapters appear in the Fountain app page. And you can also search, you can access transcripts on the episode page, and you can also search for the transcript as well. So if you're looking for a particular phrase or term, you can do that really easily and just get to the part you want to listen to, which is super cool. So what are the benefits of transcripts? Firstly, you can make your podcast more accessible. So give people who are hard of hearing a way to read along to your podcast. Or just people who prefer to read instead of listen, or maybe people who don't have headphones and they're on the bus or whatever. It's great for accessibility. Secondly is you can enable listeners to search for topics, like I mentioned. So you can just skip straight to the part that you want to listen to based on a mention of a specific keyword. And I think this is a great convenience feature that saves people a lot of time if they don't want to listen to the entire episode. And then thirdly, there's also some SEO benefits that come about with chapters as well. And so without a transcript, search engines are only indexing the text in your like episode title, show notes, etc. So giving the search engines more to work from, more text content, just increases your discoverability. And then the last thing is that transcripts, give editors and writers the material they need to write about your podcast. So it's much better for getting PR coverage. For example, if there was like a really quote-worthy part of your podcast that a journalist wanted to share, they have the transcript there. But also it means that you can repurpose your content for other mediums. So if you wanted to repurpose your podcast content as a blog or like a newsletter, you have the text content there that you can just edit, cut down, do whatever you want with, and then reformat through the channel that you want to put out through. So a really, really useful feature all in all. Just how to add transcripts in Blubrry. So you can add transcripts in Blubrry. You will need to purchase the $10 a month add-on, which is available through the Blubrry dashboard. And it will automatically create a transcript for each episode you publish. Similar with chapters, you can also upload your own transcript file, which is usually in an SRT or VTT file format. And again, there are other tools that you can use to generate these, but doing it through Blubrry is just a super convenient way to do it. One thing as well is even if you don't provide transcripts, people in the Fountain app can just request a transcript through the app. So we use an AI tool to generate a transcript for you. The quality is pretty good. Like it detects different languages. It's pretty accurate. But again, we've done that because we believe in the power of transcripts. And so I think it's a great kind of convenience feature to have. So how to add transcripts in the Blubrry dashboard, you'll need to go to episodes, edit episode, and then episode transcript. And you'll see there on the side, on the right sort of sidebar, there's just a place where you can upload a transcript file or generate one if you've already paid for the add-on. And then, yeah, very similar experience also in the PowerPress plugin. So you have the option to upload a transcript file or generate one. Super easy to do. Chris, I'd love to get some of your thoughts on transcripts.
Well, I think it's important to realize that this is a very powerful podcasting 2.0 standardized feature. So when you say use this feature, it's available on every podcast client that supports that standard. It's not it's not just like to one particular app. And I think that's really important to underscore because it makes it universally available, but also you as a podcaster can go back in time and what did we talk about? When did we talk about? And what was our take on this particular issue, etc. And you can reconstruct your previous conversations yourself. And with tools like large language models coming online, it's going to be even more valuable down the road to have this in text. And you'll be able to put it into a large language model and search your podcast and things like that. So I think we're just beginning to scratch the usefulness of transcripts. And I'm really thrilled that Apple decided to use the podcasting 2.0 standard for their app instead of creating like their own standard. So I think it's one of the most powerful features of podcasting 2.0.
And
Yeah,
go ahead, Nick.
no, I was just going to add on to that and say, like, Chris, you mentioned sort of LLMs and kind of positioning it more as a podcast utility to go back and check previous episodes. But I think that's also really interesting from a listener point of view. Like Fountain doesn't support this yet. I've seen some podcast apps experiment with this, but actually compiling all the transcript data across all podcasts and then having essentially a searchable index, which is semantic. So, that potentially opens up new forms of discovery for you guys in your podcast in the future when people can search for a specific topic or ask a specific question. And then the LLM has access to all the data to be able to give you back the answer and recommend a podcast, or even better, a specific part of an episode from a podcast that is completely relevant to the thing you're asking, which is pretty cool.
While we're sharing today 4 features, let's just also remember here that everything you've seen on the plugin, it's all available. You don't have to be a hosting customer to use these features. Anything that we're talking about today can be used with your own transcript file. If you are a hosting customer and are subscribed to the ability to create transcripts, we do it for you automatically. But I think the more important thing here is what when this expansion and something that we really haven't talked about too much. Chris indicated Apple picked this particular feature up. Apple's also looking at additional features that we have implemented within the podcasting 2.0 space. Today, we're talking about 4. There's actually about 25 new features that are built into the platform, both in PowerPress and on the dashboard, along with other hosting companies. So the future is, and what we've done here is we're expanding the capability of apps to allow your listeners to interact in a new way. The goal is not necessarily to um, take them away from the app. We want them to interact on the app and engage with you on the app. So this is a big part of this, and it goes into a much, much bigger discussion that we don't have time for today. But these are the first 2 features are just really, really easy to implement. And then the stuff that I'm really excited about is some stuff we're going to talk about next. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think on that point, the great thing about this podcasting 2.0 community is it's an open and free democracy, right? Really, the best ideas win. Anyone can propose a specification for a new feature or tag. Any of the hosting companies can choose to or not to implement it, and same with the podcast player. So really, the best features win. And I think the fact that Apple have integrated transcripts in the way they have using this specification just shows what a great feature it is. And hopefully there are more to come as well. Just a question in the chat from Jennifer, who's asking about automated transcripts. And she's asking, is there a way to train the model to spell often incorrectly spelled names? I think probably a common bugbear of people who use this feature potentially.
With Blubrries, we do our best. We actually provided the name of the guest host when we're actually doing the query, so they'll know who the actual host and guest names are. So if it spells it wrong, it isn't our fault. The model was too stupid to figure it out. And be honest with you, we're using the dumbest large language models we'll ever use. It'll get better over time. But if you build your own, it basically builds your own transcript with all the services that are out there. Many of them do have training features, but it really goes beyond this discussion.
Yeah, I think also some of the transcript tools out there, I mean, not actually fountains, but some of them also can detect individual speakers as well, and it will label each individual speaker, which is really cool. It makes it's almost like following a WhatsApp group chat with the transcripts, because you can see exactly who's talking, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I think, we're still early with transcripts. I think that in the next kind of, year or two, this feature is really going to develop, like particularly through the use of AI. It's just getting better and better. And then once we have like the better raw materials, like we can make that into a much better kind of listener focused feature through the podcast player.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's just going to get better.
Cool. Yeah, on to the next feature. We could really do like a whole session on value for value, and it's kind of become the thing that's defined podcasting 2.0 in many ways because of the potential impact and opportunity that it brings to podcasters. But before I get into that, like I think just a little side note on monetization, because it's always been a big topic for podcasters, whether you are early on in your journey or you're more mature as a podcaster. Monetization is always going to be important to some degree. For some podcasters, not at all. But I'm sure that many of you here are already generating revenue through ads, sponsors, subscriptions, or potentially some other channels. And I think there is a pressure for podcasters to make some sort of money to at least cover the costs, and also the time that you invest in your podcast. And, even if you consider your podcast as a hobby and not a business, which I think many do, some form of revenue can motivate you to keep going. And I think it's that motivational factor, which is really, really important. It's not just the numbers, it's the motivation that comes through it. So yeah, the common revenue sources for podcasters are ads, sponsors, and subscriptions, and there are some others. I'd love to hear, in the chat, which revenue income streams you're using for your podcast, if any, and like what the pros and cons are of each. From our own experience of speaking to podcasters, I think that we see it like this. The pros of advertising is it's very easy to set up within your Blubrry dashboard. It's very little effort required from you. You just kind of set it and forget it. You turn it on and then it just does its work. But, on the negative side, the revenues are going to be relatively low unless you have a large audience. CPMs are what they are. And the other thing is that a lot of people say it negatively impacts the experience of listening to a podcast. Up to 46% of people say they always or often skip ads. And the more ads you add, like the more revenue you're going to generate, but the worse the listener experience becomes. And then I think the other thing too is that advertising demand is highly volatile, and it really depends on what the niche is of your particular podcast, but it is very seasonal and it does, come and go depending on, the popularity of your particular topic. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Sponsors, I can see RB Lifestyle here in the in the chat saying we sell our own sponsors. I mean, sponsors are a great way to have like a stable revenue source. And I think that, on the cons is like, again, like fairly low revenues unless you have a pretty large audience. And the other thing too is that if you are owning the relationships with your sponsors, like that can become tricky and time consuming. It can become a full-time job in itself. Like really your job is to be a podcaster and not an account manager or salesperson. And then, some podcasters also find that they can exercise editorial control over your content, which I think is the last thing that we all want. But for some people, it's just like a necessary evil they have to put up with in order to have the income from sponsors. And then subscriptions as well, again, a very stable revenue source, particularly if people are paying annually and not monthly. But we often hear from podcasters, I mean, there are many different ways of doing subscriptions. PayPal being one, not PayPal, Patreon being one of them. But fulfilling all these additional exclusive benefits for subscribers can be a lot of extra work. If you have to manage a Discord channel, you have to do Ask Me Anything, you have to do additional behind the scenes content or live streams for subscribers, that may well detract from your kind of core focus, which is on providing value through your regular podcast content through your public RSS feed. So I think that's just something that we're always mindful of. And then again, there's the argument that is it wise to put your best content behind a paywall and limit its potential reach? Really, I think your best content should be in your public RSS feed. So really the people who are paying for the additional content, maybe they're not getting the best content out there, but they're really the type of listener who really just want to hear everything from you because they're such a big supporter. And I think this last point really ties into what we're about to talk about with value for value, is that some subscription platforms are very disconnected from the listener experience. And like, I'm going to like bundle subscriptions and like donations here as one thing, even though subscriptions usually come with some sort of listener benefit. Ultimately, they are the same thing. It's the listener paying you some money. If you're going to ask for that, it has to be very, very easy to do and very, very simple. And the fact that you have to leave the app to go and do something, or put in your credit card details, set up a direct debit, it kind of detracts from the listening experience again. So that's just something to bear in mind. Just checking out the chat. I can see Martin here in the chat saying he's receiving donations through PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, even though he drinks tea, Patreon, etc. So yeah, I mean, it's clear that people want to ask their listeners for some form of support. I think it's just finding the right way to ask and the right platform to do it through. So what is value for value? Really, the way we see it is it's a radically simple monetization model. You provide your content for free without any access restrictions at all. And if people find it valuable, you make it really easy for them to give value back. And that might sound really crazy in this day and age, but this model's actually worked for thousands of years. If you think about street performers, that's been working for them for a very long time. And I think what value for value does, it flips the typical payment model on its head. Traditionally, enjoyment follows payment. I've paid for something and now I'm going to get to consume it, which is exactly how it works on Patreon. But with value for value, the payment follows the enjoyment. So it's completely voluntary. If you got some value, it's really easy to send some value back. And this is exactly how it works with the street musician. You're free to walk on, but this is something that the audience intuitively knows. If you want the music to continue, you have to throw a couple of coins into the hat.
I also would like to jump in and mention that it's completely under the podcaster and the listener's control on both ends. So as opposed to something like YouTube, where after you get to a certain size, you can turn on partnership and monetization options, and then you get paid by Google, and you only get paid by Google. This is a system that is cross-application. It isn't tied to any one particular large tech company. It's completely decentralized and vendor-free too. And as a podcaster who's trying to build something that's going to last a long time, that matters a lot.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, I always use this as a great example of value for value. You might remember the Radiohead album back in 2007 called In Rainbows. They gave that away for free. I think it was a few weeks before the actual CD and digital album launched. I remember this at the time. I remember being in school and someone telling me about it and saying, hey, you can just like pay 1p or 1 cent for this Radiohead album and you get to download it. Isn't that cool? And I think at the time I did pay that, like whatever the minimum amount was. And I thought, this is never going to work. People are just going to pay the bare minimum and they're not going to make any money. But I was completely wrong. 12 weeks later, the CD and digital album launched, and they made more money in those 12 weeks than they did from the entire sales of their previous album. And I think that just goes to show, like, your passionate fans, your most passionate fans, like if you give them the opportunity, the ability to have like an infinite ceiling to what they can send you, like you'll be really surprised what you get back. And I think this is like, for us, like a criticism of Buy Me a Coffee, for you to say, okay, I've got a few options here. I've got $2.50, I've got $5, or I've got $10, and I can't do anything else. Like if you take away the ceiling, the people who really, really want to support you will go above and beyond.
I don't love the coffee framing either. I would suggest probably your work is worth more than a coffee.
I agree.
Yeah, well, so that kind of brings us on to the next thing. So instead of copies, we use sats, and sats are small units of Bitcoin, right? They're the equivalent to cents to dollars. It just makes it easier for us to send smaller payments in Bitcoin. And the reason we use Bitcoin for this is multiple reasons. Like first, it's really fast, it's really low fee, which allows you to send really small amounts of money with very little overhead fee. And it allows you to do things like split the payments. So you can actually set up splits for your podcast so that it's not just you receiving the money, it's going to your co-host, your guest, your producer, the person who makes the artwork for your show. And these are all things that you can't do with traditional money. So this is how, value for value looks in Fountain. What you're seeing here is what we call a boost, which is just a payment with a message. There is another way to support, which is called streaming, which is just sending a really small amount of money for every minute you spend listening. And the key thing to highlight here is it's completely optional, it's voluntary, and what we see happening on Fountain is, well, this is personally how I use Fountain. If I'm listening to a podcast that supports value for value, even if they don't talk about it on their show, if I hear something that really hits me in that moment, it might be an interesting fact or an interesting insight or perspective on something that I find valuable. I can just send some money to them right there and then, and a message. And I know guaranteed that they're going to see it because there's a payment attached to it. It's not just like a wall of spam comments coming in on Twitter or YouTube. It's payments and money. So payments and messages. So you have that signal that the podcast is going to pay attention. So it's a really, really easy way to kind of show your support. And the great thing is also you don't need any Bitcoin experience to get started with this at all. Both you and your listeners, and we'll get onto that in a little bit, exactly how that works.
I would point out too that having the boost button in the app is revolutionary. I hear from listeners that have been listening to my stuff for 15 plus years that have never written in that entire 15 plus years until the button was right there in the app and they could press it while they're listening. And now I get messages from them every week.
The engagement and the dopamine hit I get from a comment coming in via Boost is incredibly different than what I get from an email. So the money is insignificant. It's really about the comment and the engagement that comes back from the listener.
Yeah, I mean, we hear that a lot from podcasters. It's not the money, it's the message. To think that people have taken the time to send you something, even if it's only, a couple of cents, like it does mean a lot. And it goes back to that original thing about like how you're going to stay motivated while making your podcast. And that there's an often cited fact that I think it's 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, like this would explain it, like particularly at those early stages, like how you're going to stay motivated, inspired to continue doing what you're doing, even though if you know that there's not many people listening. So this gets you through that early period, but also helps you sustain it kind of over time. Cool. So just a few benefits then of value for value. We've already talked about like the revenue streams. And I think the great thing here is that even if you already monetize through ads, sponsors, or subscriptions, you can still give listeners an easy way to show their support through value for value. And, it is complementary to those other sources. And I think a great, it can also completely substitute them. You can just go 100% value for value and not have to stress about ads or sponsors or creating additional content for subscribers. And I think No Agenda is a really good example of that. It's a news and politics show from Adam Curry. It's been self-funded, 100% audience funded for like 20 years. And what we're seeing is regularly they're earning around $600 a month just through payments on Fountain. But they're also giving people the ability to support through any other modern podcast app, as well as send checks in the post or send money on PayPal. So, asking your listeners to support actually can pay the bills, particularly if you are consistent and you're really hyper-focused on it over time. The second thing is discovery. So like it's not just you receiving a payment and receiving a message. What happens on Fountain is whenever you send a boost, it gets displayed on the episode page, but it also gets displayed on the home feed. So on Fountain, you can follow other listeners and you can see a home feed similar like on Twitter, where you're going to see all of their latest boosts and comments and interactions with the podcast they've been listening to. So that's a really great way to, find things that your friends are talking about, or find things that the people that are interested in the same things as you are listening to, and discover it. And because there's a payment attached to it, it's not like someone recommending you a podcast episode to listen to over dinner, because if you see someone sending like $50 to a podcast or $100, you're going to think, okay, well, that's a fair amount of money. I think that episode is probably worth listening to. So the payment is really a signal, and that's the thing that drives you to listen to it. The third thing is around community. So like, obviously you can build amazing relationships with listeners through boosts because people can reply to them. And you can actually really start conversations around your podcast, and having a place for your audience to hang out and chat together, as well as sharing their feedback and their ideas with you, but kind of chatting amongst each other. That's brilliant for audience retention. And that's what we see. Like the podcasters who are actively pushing value for value, they're not losing listeners, they're only gaining them. People stick around for that conversation because it's part of the culture of the podcast. And then the final thing I've mentioned already, it's about staying motivated. It's a great way just to realize that you're not podcasting into a void. All the other metrics you might be looking at with regards to download numbers, etc. They aren't as reliable a metric as how valuable the audience find your content. And even if it's just 5 people supporting you every week, that's a great reason to continue.
Yeah, in fact, a smaller podcast can be a lot more sustainable with value for value than with advertising. We did just a small show for our most dedicated fans, probably about 5,000 downloads. Never going to really make great money with an advertiser, but we just set a milestone and we said when we stack 1.1 million sats, we'll produce an episode. And it made the show entirely viable and we could pay our editor and it worked really well.
I'll talk about total earnings Blubrry customers have made when we get to the end here, and I'll talk about why it's helped the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean that maybe you can get onto that now, Todd, because my next slide is more about the earnings we're seeing through Fountain. So it'll be interesting
Sure.
to see how they match up.
Yeah, so and Nick's going to show the interface here in a minute, but once you set up the value for value system, you have the ability to do splits. Basically, you can send some money to people that you support, share money with your co-host, however it may be. As part of the implementation that we did, we take a 3% fee for the processing, and that's basically for our PowerPress users that don't host with us, that use value for value. We get a little money back for the implementation. So I did check the numbers yesterday, and based upon doing the reverse math, we're at about $39,000 what podcasters have earned on their shows that they have basically taken home over about the past year. So, $39,000 is not a small amount to shout about, and it's come in at $1.25, $3, $5, $50 at a shot across this time. So yeah, about 39 grand so far that Blubrry podcasters have earned.
Yeah, wow, that's really encouraging because Fountain's been around for a couple of years now. When we started out, the numbers were so small, and it's really encouraging to see they're getting bigger. Here's just a snapshot of the stats from total support on Fountain in 2023. So we saw total earnings on Fountain of $200,000, which is we've come a long way since the early days. And what we're seeing is about 70% of that value is coming from Boost and the remaining value coming from streaming. So Boost still being the most popular way to support, or where at least the greatest volume is coming through. And we see 42,000 boosts on Fountain last year, which is a huge amount. And that doesn't include all the comments and replies that come in off the top of them. And we see the highest boost value on Fountain in last year, $340. So again, like I said, if you remove the ceiling, people will go above and beyond to support if they really, really care about the podcast and want to support it. And we see the average boost value just under $5, which again has gone up since the early days, but not bad. And I think some of the larger boosts maybe bring that number up, but it's a pretty good average. I guess equivalent really to buying a coffee, if you want to think about it that way. And the podcast with the most supporters had 1,400 supporters last year, which is no small amount. It does take a lot of focus and dedication to be consistent around talking about value for value, which we'll get on to in a second. But that just goes to show, I mean, that's a lot of listeners. So it is possible.
Someone asked if it's Bitcoin. Satoshis are, I believe, 1/10 millionth of a Bitcoin, or 1/1 millionth of a Bitcoin, something like that. So it's
I think it's 100 million.
100 million. So it's the smallest. It's like a penny out of a dollar. You basically are able to give a small increment of sats, and yes, it's directly transferable back into Bitcoin.
Yeah, and you could cash it out if you wanted to. You don't have to keep it in Bitcoin. Since I run a business, my preference is to keep it in Bitcoin because the asset outperforms inflation. So as a business, we have something that is actually outperforming what our dollar is doing. So we tend to hold it for a little while, but you could cash it out instantly as well.
And value for value is not just this; it's also PayPal, whatever way you want to donate. So this is just what we've implemented currently for value in the apps.
Right. It's a way of giving value back through Boost, but it could be a check in the mail if that's what the listener prefers.
Yeah, so how to set up value for value in Blubrry. The main thing here is you're going to need a Lightning address. And in simple terms, a Lightning address is just an email address that allows people to send you Bitcoin. And you can get a Lightning address by downloading Fountain or Alby, and you'll get one. It looks exactly like an email. It's formatted in the same way. But that will give you what you need to then fill in this section. So if you're in the Blubrry dashboard, you can just connect Alby. Alby is like a web extension that acts as like a wallet. So it means that all the money that goes to your podcast will just go to that wallet on your web extension. And from here, you can also configure the splits as well. So all you have to do is connect Alby and you're done. But you could also invite, your co-hosts or your guests to connect Alby as well, or just ask them for a Lightning address from Fountain. You can put that in and you can split the earnings with them.
Yeah, you can connect with Alby, you can put your Fountain address in, or you can put your own node in. And for those of you, Alby's done some changes, but we can still get you accounts on Alby, no problem, with our relationship we have with them.
Yeah, and you'll find these settings in the Blubrry dashboard under Manage Show and Value for Value, the one at the end. And then, through the PowerPress plugin, very simple. You'll go to the dashboard, PowerPress on the left sidebar, and then to Experimental. I love it how that's labeled Experimental.
That's gonna change soon.
It's an experiment that seems to be working anyway.
Yeah.
But again, very, very similar thing. You can just choose your wallet, put the Lightning address in, and you're good to go. You can receive payments, not just from listeners on Fountain, but any more modern podcast apps. So you can go to newpodcastapps.com. You can find a full list of all the different apps that support this. And I think that's the beauty of this thing. It's not just setting up one channel like Patreon where you can receive payments from listeners on that platform. It's you do it once and you can receive payments from listeners anywhere. And that's really the beauty of it. And I think that's also why we've used Bitcoin, is it works in an interoperable way across the ecosystem rather than in a walled garden.
Right. It's programmable money that has no gatekeeper. But what's functionally happening under the scenes is these values are being written to your RSS feed. So your RSS feed becomes the source of truth for all this information. And that's why all the podcast clients can read it. It's not locked up in one particular platform database that you need an API call with a key to access. It's just in an XML file on an HTTP endpoint. So anything can read it.
And I have split set up, and what a split is, I send a percentage of the money I receive for Boost to different apps and services and people that I'm supporting. If I want to have my editor in for a 10% split, I can add them. So it feeds the entire ecosystem. And like Nick and his company with Fountain, app developers have had this huge challenge of how do I stay in business? How do I keep building the app? How do I keep adding features? Well, it's because they get a little bit of the split from the app and able to partly fund their business with some of that revenue, and allows us to have better apps. And at the same time, the whole ecosystem is, I guess for a better word, is rewarded.
Yep.
Not
and all
just
of those
the
splits are
podcaster.
transparent because they're all in that RSS file. So you,
Yep.
as a listener, can just look at the file and see who's getting the split and what their percentage is. And I want to underscore what Todd said. I think it's such a revolution to build in a monetization path just directly into podcasting that benefits the entire ecosystem, like the app developers, like the podcast index, or the vendors that run the services where they take a fee. That is a good thing, because in the past, we had each one of these different parts of the ecosystem trying to come up with their own bespoke way to desperately stay afloat and monetize. And we saw a lot of crazy things tried. And this is something that keeps the whole ecosystem healthy, and everybody is involved in the value chain. I think it's huge, and it's a big part of what's going to keep podcasting sustainable long term.
Yeah, I mean, if the incentives are right, the outcome's right, and that's what we're seeing. People are motivated, and I think again, when it comes to incentives, just to mention No Agenda again, obviously like a very early pioneer of this model, but they will have a split in their feed for the person who does the chapters, the person who provides the transcript, the person who creates the artwork for that episode, the person who does the audio, the person who does the mastering. So the full team is getting rewarded for the effort they're putting into making the podcast happen, which is a great thing, because podcasting can be like a very scrappy team effort. Everyone has to chip in to make stuff happen, to fix problems, to get stuff working. So if the incentives are there, then people stay motivated.
Value for value, though, I would recommend you go over to value, the number 4, value.info, and it's more than just the treasure people are donating. It's also their time and talent. So there's some other aspects to this we haven't went into, but please go over to value, the number 4, value.info to get yourself educated on the full value for value model.
Yeah. Just moving on to how this works from the listener's point of view. Very simple. Download Fountain or any other modern podcast app. You can actually top up your Fountain wallet without having any Bitcoin. So you can just put in your credit card details. You can convert your dollars or your pounds or your euros into Bitcoin, into sats. And then from the player, I've just used one of Chris's podcasts here as an example. I just have a boost button. I can hit boost, type my message, choose how much I want to send. We'll also show you that amount in sats in USD as well. So you get an idea of how much those sats are actually worth. And then you can also access the streaming settings from the player as well. So this definitely has got much, much easier over the years. And I think particularly in the next few months, it's going to get even easier.
Yeah, so those that have crypto stigmatism, we have a way ahead soon.
Yeah, and people often sort of ask me, like, do you think that people send more or less money when they're sending sats? And I don't know, because most people, when they're sending, I mean, Todd thinks more. I think he's probably right. But when you're sending sats, you don't really think about how much that's worth in dollars or pounds. You just send whatever feels right. And as Chris will attest to, people often just send money that has a particular meaning to it. So on Chris's podcast, they have like zip code boosts where people will boost their zip code, which depending on where you live can get pretty expensive. So again, and there's also different codes, like a row of ducks is like 2222. So there's this meaning in the numbers. And I think that it kind of creates a culture where you're not really thinking about how much money it is. It's just a different way to get involved and sort of show some engagement back to the podcaster.
I call it tokenized. Yeah, go ahead.
It's denominated in sats, and we're fine with that. And it is the source of some of the most organic growth in our show that's been from the audience. Memes, themes, so many topic ideas have been sourced from the boost where a booster will come in and another booster will feed off of that. Then pretty soon we've got 2 or 3 people in the audience plus the host involved in a conversation. And the next thing you know, it's a show topic or it's a meme in the show or something else. And then the other thing that's really special is you remember these people. If you get the opportunity to do meetups, you get to meet these people who have been supporting you and boosting you, and the connection is so solid, it's so real, and it's so immediate, and it's so rewarding when you get to meet these people in person that have been supporting you and sending you little messages so you feel like you know each other. It's I've been doing podcasts for almost 19 years. This is the most rewarding aspect of it that I've ever seen, and we've only been doing it for a couple of years.
The thing that's also cool is if you have people that don't engage a lot, but they listen a lot, they can actually stream sats by the minute. They can support every minute that you're listening to. And what's kind of cool is you can actually see when they drop off. You see you got streaming sats for 35 minutes and the show was an hour. So I lost that person at 35 minutes.
Yeah.
So it actually gives you a little bit of intel on how your show's doing for those that support you the most. But anyway, go ahead, Nick.
The streaming sats is a good example of something you couldn't do necessarily well with fiat. You wouldn't want to necessarily send 3-4 cents a second because the transaction fees with the 7 middlemen that would be involved with that transaction are like $1.25 to $2. Where with sats, over the Lightning Network, you can send ridiculously small amounts of money frequently. And that's just one of the neat abilities you get because we are using that system on the back end. It's fairly transparent to the user, really.
I have people that send from 10 sats a minute to 1,000 sats a minute. It really runs the gamut.
I just want to move on to the next slide because we still want to cover the live streaming stuff at the end and make sure we have time to get through a couple of questions. So just quickly, a few bits of best practice on value for value. The first thing is ask your listeners to boost. Like, you'd be surprised how many people enable this feature and expect the money to start coming in, but it's really on the podcaster to make that ask and do it in the right way. So put it at the start of the podcast, at the end. If you have ad reads, maybe do it after those or wherever makes sense for you. Build it into your regular format and be really consistent about doing that. And you will start to see results from it, particularly if you're, going to explain to people how to do it and why to do it. That's really, really important. And you don't have to use complicated terms. You don't have to talk about podcasting 2.0. You don't have to say value for value. For some podcasters, it helps to use those terms because people want to be specific about what this is. But for other people, they might just find it confusing. So find a language that works for you, make it relatable, don't overcomplicate it. And I think it's really important as well to explain the why. It might be, more income for you, but ultimately that's like a benefit for you and not for listeners. So you have to really think about what's in it for them. Ultimately, the more consistently you have listeners supporting you, the more you're going to be able to continue creating content more regularly and increase the quality of that content as well. And I think the other great selling point for listeners is that they finally have a way to contact you directly and send you a message that they're going to see. So that think about what's in it for them rather than what's in it for you and how you're explaining it. And I think just to underline that point about consistency, all new behaviors take a long time to kind of settle in, so it's not going to happen overnight. And I can see in the chat there was a message around Adam Curry, and it's maybe kind of disingenuous to suggest that people should just follow his strategy and hope that it works. But I think it does work. He's proven that it works. Okay, he's been doing this a very long time, but it really is consistency that is key. And in given time, you'll find those people, those passionate fans who will want to give back.
For me, it's taken about a year to build.
Yeah. Sorry, Todd, I didn't mean to interrupt. But also, I would add too that you have to give them something worth boosting and supporting. You have to create something that's worth their value, their time, or their treasure. That's where the pressure is on you, but that's why you're making a show to begin with. And I would add to that podcasting is something very special. Just briefly, podcasting is like no other medium. Look at the mainstream media. Look how horrible that's become. Look at the trust levels in that. Look what's happening with social media and how that's just becoming mainstream media 2.0. Podcasting is a rare, truly distributed, truly owned by the creator's medium. And it's maybe the only one left like it. And what we're now doing is making it possible to support that medium and that media with something that's also decentralized directly from the audience. And so that means as you get further and further down the value for value track, like Todd's saying, it takes a little while to ramp up. But as it ramps up, the listener becomes your biggest customer, not your advertiser, not the YouTube algorithm. And that fundamentally changes how you think about the composition and the content of your show for the better, because now you're thinking about how to optimize it for the listener in every instance. And that just increases the value they receive from the podcast so that they increase their support. And it becomes a flywheel system where you create quality content focused on the audience supports you, which feeds back into creating quality content.
Yeah, it's a great point. I often see podcasters who are really trying to optimize their content for YouTube and the YouTube algorithm. And what that means is, you're not playing by the same rules anymore. You're trying to do things which are going to get your content picked up by YouTube, making it a certain length, etc., doing certain things, having a really clickbaity title, having this really unnecessary thumbnail image for your podcast. And all of these things just detract from creating value for listeners. So I totally agree with that point. Just a couple more things. Read the comments out in your podcast. Chris does a great job of this. Mention the person, how much they sent, their message. Is a great way to kind of build FOMO and loyalty with listeners, because people start to realize okay, cool. If I want to have my, 10 seconds of fame and have my comment read out, I've got to send Chris a boost. And so that's how you get people involved, create a culture around, value for value within your podcast. Also, like and reply to comments. So you can do that within Fountain. Again, that makes the boost more visible. It makes them more likely to get seen in the feed, which again drives better discovery for your podcast. And one thing as well, we see people gamifying this. So some podcasts will have a leaderboard. Chris, I think you guys do this on Linux Unplugged, right? You have a leaderboard of the top supporters over time. Some podcasters will give away some free merch once you hit a certain target, or give their listeners certain titles once they reach a certain amount, which is really cool. So there's loads of things you can do with this, and there's loads of great examples of podcasters out there who are doing this. Just look at Fountain's top charts, listen to some of their podcasts, and hear what they're doing to create that culture around their podcast. And then also just share Fountain links. Make sure you share and direct people towards where you want them to listen. I think a lot of podcasters are unsure whether they should recommend a podcast app people to listen to, and I'm not suggesting you recommend Fountain, but recommend a modern podcast app, and get people to find the app that works for them, that supports this feature, because ultimately it's in your best interest, and it's in their best interest too, because it builds on that listener experience. I'm just going to skip past this bit real quick because I still want to cover live, but there's just a script here that, if you're struggling for what to say when talking about value for value on your show, you can use our script. You can also go to fountain.fm/podcaster-guide. There's a guide there. It breaks down all of this stuff. It gives you more kind of ideas and inspiration for how to talk to your listeners about value for value. And then, the last feature, live. This is how the live streams look on Fountain Web. We also have them in the app as well, but I particularly wanted to highlight web because we also support video on web. That will be coming to the mobile app very soon. You'll see that a lot of the other modern podcast apps also support this feature. They also support video in the app as well. So I don't know if you guys are live streaming already, but if you already are streaming to YouTube, X, Twitch, or LinkedIn, it's really easy to pull your live stream into podcast apps as well, which I think is just a much more convenient way for people to listen. So this is how Fountain live streams look. And just a few kind of benefits of live streams. Like firstly, that real-time audience participation is really quite something else. Like having a more interactive element to your show, giving listeners the ability to ask questions like in real time as you're recording, steer the conversation. That's really key, and it kind of ends up creating a much more wholesome show. Like I've listened to some of Chris's live streams, and it's just really great to hear like there is a plan for what they want to talk about, but it's also flexible. It can be guided by the listeners, and that feeling involved in that way just really makes you feel part of something that's quite special. One thing also we see with live streams, it's a great way to get larger revenues through value for value. Like people who are listening live are your true fans, and they're much more likely to send larger amounts more frequently. So something to bear in mind. It's also a great way to just like break the cycle and have something different. You might post episodes like monthly, weekly, daily, whatever your cadence is. Like having a live stream as well, particularly something which is like kind of consistent in timing that people can look forward to and have in their diary, it is a great way to offer something different. But also like being reactive as well. And we see a lot of podcasts doing things that react to breaking news or big stories or events. It allows you to be the first people to talk about that if you're doing it live, which I think is pretty cool, and also a great way to differentiate yourselves from other podcasts. So starting a live stream in Blubrry, like two simple things. You're going to need somewhere to host the live stream and somewhere to produce it. So like for this live stream in particular, I'm using StreamYard. I can use this exact same software to create my live stream for the podcast apps as well. And how I set that up in Blubrry, this is how it looks in the dashboard. I'll just go to show and live item. Live item is just the name for this feature within Podcasting 2.0. And you can choose the status. So pending, that's how you set up a live stream that's scheduled for a time in the future. You just change that to live when you're going to go live, set the start time, end date, etc. It doesn't matter if it's like not 100% accurate. If you start 10 minutes earlier or later, that's fine. Title it, and then importantly, you're going to have to include the audio and video stream link. And this is a thing you're going to get from the from the hosting. So similar thing again in the PowerPress plugin, very similar interface. You can just add in all the information there. And then how to set this up, like personally, how I've done this before, and something that I've learned from other podcasters is two tools. The first one is Viloud. It's a really great audio and video hosting service that allows you to host live streams. So what it's going to do is going to give you an RTMP URL and a stream key. And that's the thing you're going to put into a software like StreamYard, where you're going to be able to produce the live stream. So you'll get your hosts, your co-hosts, etc., to tune into StreamYard, and then you're going to send it from StreamYard to Viloud, which is then going to send it to your RSS feed out to all the podcast apps. Sounds really complicated, but it's actually super simple. These are the only tools you need, really. Viloud, I believe, is free to create an account. You get a certain number of minutes a month. StreamYard is paid, but I believe also, Todd, you mentioned that you might also be able to set up or host a live stream through Blubrry servers as well. So it's actually pretty easy to get this off the ground. And then we've only got a couple of minutes left. So just one thing I'm going to end on as well is like a couple of like kind of key points for this. Get your timing right. You know, think about when people are going to be most able to tune in based on where your listeners are. Be consistent, so people kind of build that habit of, you know, joining Linux Unplugged, for example, every Sunday afternoon. Ask listeners to get involved. Like, that's how you get the best response, and hear their thoughts and hear their reactions to influence the direction of the show. And then you can also publish your live streams as episodes later. So you can actually record the live stream. You know, Chris does this with Linux Unplugged as well. They just produce like a cut down, edited version of the live stream, which is then put out into the main RSS feed for everyone else to listen to who didn't join. So that's a really great way to do it. Cool. I've rushed through the last bit because we didn't really quite have enough time, and we're at the hour now. It's been great to see all the questions to come through. I know that Todd's been answering loads of these in the chat. Sorry we didn't get to all of them. But thank you all for joining today. There will be a recap email that goes out after this live stream where we'll share the full presentation, the link to watch it back, and also just like a few links to things we've talked about, contact details for myself, you know, for anyone else who's hosted, Chris and Todd. So if you have any further questions, you can follow up afterwards. Any final words from you guys?
I think the main thing is Blubrry supports both audio and true video podcasting. We also, within the live stream, just remember you can do audio and video live streams within the apps. So you can be audio lit or video lit, or one or the other. I think that's the main thing to remember. If you have any questions for the Blubrry team, definitely go over to blubrry.com/support. Submit your questions over there. Those of you that signed up for this, we will send this out to the folks that signed up. If you did not sign up and just joined us, drop us an email, todd@blubrry.com, and I'll make sure you get a copy of the presentation as well. This will be available for replay on YouTube as well.
Great. Well, yeah, that brings us to the end. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope you learned something new. Hope you found this valuable. I hope you now know exactly what to do to activate these features in Blubrry. Please do let us know how you're finding them as well. Like, we love to hear from podcasters about how they're getting on. These things are improving all the time. It's really one big beta mode experiment. So we'd love to get your feedback. We'd love to hear how your listeners are responding to these new features.